Welcome, everyone. My name is Charlene Margot, and I'm co-founder of nonprofit The Parent Venture. We are honored and delighted to have with us tonight Dr. Jackie Rodriguez, who is CEO of the National Center for Learning Disabilities. She will be talking to you about what families need to know, legal changes, and the future of special education. Please join me in a really warm virtual welcome for Jackie Rodriguez. Take it away, Jackie.
Thank you, Charlene. It's so lovely to be with you all. And honestly, I'm so privileged to have an audience with family members, caretakers, those who are supporting all of our community members. The National Center for Learning Disabilities is a national not-for-profit that has had a almost next year 50th anniversary supporting students, their families, and their educators in ensuring that everybody can have a fulfilled livelihood. I do want to share with you our current mission statement and our current vision statement because last year, actually in 2024, at this point, we were able to update this and with a very particular nuance and change. In one way, I think we've always been called to this mission. And so maybe not much has changed for those who have seen it before, but for those who work within NCLD and then even truly our constituency, hopefully this will feel welcoming. It will feel as though you belong, because we are no longer advocating for, but necessarily advocating with. So, as you can imagine, NCLD has multiple constituency groups that it calls on to help us inform policy and research priorities. They include the Young Adult Leadership Council, of which Riley Mulcahy was a part. He's an alum. We also have our Family Leadership Council, and we would love to see many of you, if not all, apply to participate in that fellowship program. And we have a professional advisory board, and those are thought leaders and experts in the field of learning disabilities. And together, alongside our board and, of course, our amazing team, we ensure that the work that NCLD produces, supports, elevates, and advocates for is with you all, hearing from you first about what the needs are and ensuring that your needs are centered in everything that we are called to do. And finally, our vision statement is probably the most important part of the work that we do because essentially we want to change the way the world looks at a student who is neurodivergent. Right now, there is this perception of not ability, a disability. And while we recognize the need to have labels because they're associated with funding and legal protections, ultimately, we want to see a world in which neurodivergence is not just welcomed, but expected and assumed, and that learning and thinking differently and learner variability is a part of the nomenclature and the common daily existence for everybody. So I have quite a few slides ahead of me, but I want to start us off with a short game so that I can understand who's in the audience and hear from you about some of the things you're hearing about the federal, the state, and the local levels. Tonight's presentation is all about what you need to know regarding special ed law, policy, and any changes that have occurred. So in the chat box, what I would really love for you to find is the emoji icon that allows you to give a thumbs up or a thumbs down. If you can't find it, no biggie. You can also just put in there fact or myth. I'm going to give you a series of facts and myths. I won't tell you which they are until you are able to give me what you think is happening at the federal, state, and local level. And then I'm going to go through a series of more information sharing, and we'll follow that up, of course, with your questions at the end. Are you ready? All right, here we go. The first question is, the president can eliminate the Department of Education without Congress. What do we think? Is it a fact or is it a myth? Okay, I'm seeing quite a few myths. Myths, okay, down. I love it. I love it. Nobody did it anyways. Myth, myth, myth. Okay, I have a very bright audience. For those of you who said that it was a myth, you are absolutely correct. The president cannot create an executive order, which he did, eliminating the entire department. And no, the department is not eliminated as it stands currently, but we are going to discuss which components of the department have now been moved away from the actual education building and are now housed in different agencies and what is left over. Okay, thank you for being so bright, so on it, and you're obviously thinking about the news a lot. Let's think about this one. The Office of Special Education Programs, OSEP, for those of us who know the nomenclature in ed, no longer exists. Fact or myth? Oh my gosh, I thought for sure I'd grab a few of you. Yes, this is a myth, completely a myth, and absolutely 100% not the case. OSEP still exists, and alongside OSEP, we have RSA, which is the Rehabilitative Services Administration. It also continues to exist, and they continue to reside in the department. Okay, next. Schools must implement what is written in the IEP, even if it's inconvenient or expensive. All right, I'm loving the thumbs up. Way to go. Love the facts, the truth. Yes. Okay, for those of you who believe this to be true, you are fully correct. Regardless of the expense or the convenience, schools must implement what is in the IEP. Now, we can talk at length about how schools may or may not be putting everything necessary in the IEP that would allow the student to benefit. But as it stands, the IEP remains the law of the land. Next is there's no longer a federal office that handles 504 complaints. I'm not trying to trick you. I'm just curious at what you've heard, what rumors have been flying around. Okay, so is this a fact or a myth? There is no longer an office that handles 504 complaints. I'm going to let a few more people populate because it looks like we're at a 50-50 here. Not entirely sure if this is a fact or it was a myth. Ah, and I really appreciate Christina Mason for making this comment in the chat box about it being gutted. So, this is a myth as it stands. 504 complaints that were handled at the federal level, not those that were handled through due process within your local district. There are two parallel complaint mechanisms. Both continue to exist and both are allowable. You can even do them simultaneously. However, the Office of Civil Rights, the office that handles 504 and IEP complaints, still exists. It still resides at the Department of Education. While it was gutted during the reduction in force in March and again in October, some 300 of those staff members, still down by at least 1/3, if not more, from its original staffing levels. Those people did return to the job in January of 2026 and remain on the job currently. Lots of questions about what their priorities are, but I can tell you, having met with the assistant secretary, that they are doing the work. Now, let's talk later about whether or not people are actually putting complaints in, because we know that many of the complaints submitted in 2025 were summarily dismissed. So it's giving the perception that the office no longer exists. Last one, as I recall, there are, oh, actually two more. I think there are federal resources available that clearly explain special education laws and rights. Do these exist? Are there federal resources that clearly explain this? Okay, yep. I would not be surprised if some of you put your hands in the middle. As it's written, this is a fact. I will, however, caution everybody that after every administrative transition, we do often see priorities within that administration preside and set precedent over what types of resources continue to exist. In this case, we did see quite a few resources removed from the Department of Education's website, including Dear Colleague letters and guidance notes around how to interpret IDEA, our special education law, as well as other pieces of the law. That doesn't mean that those resources don't exist. They do exist in an archive. If you were able to download them, they still actually have legal teeth, but they may not be as accessible as they once were because of the removal from websites. And finally, dyslexia is no longer in a specific learning disability identification. So in other words, SLD and dyslexia have now been decoupled and has been pulled out of the definition. Is that a fact or a myth? Okay, so I don't see as many people putting in the chat. Either you're exhausted from having to type or you're questioning this one. You're not entirely sure. And if you're questioning it, I can understand why. Okay, we think this is a myth. For those of you who said myth, you are correct. However, there is a piece of legislation right now in the Senate that would, if marked up and sent through committee, pull dyslexia out of an SLD criteria. NCLD specifically is deeply opposed, both in principle and in philosophy. We believe the dyslexia definition within the legislative text is very poorly written and not encompassing of what we know to have to be a robust definition. We also disagree with pulling it out of an SLD definition because it's antithetical to the research. That being said, it has not stopped legislators from trying to move this type of bill text forward. Okay. Thank you so much for working with me. I now know a little bit more about you as an audience. You're educated. You understand what's happening in the news, and you recognize that not everything that you hear is accurate. And I appreciate that entirely because I can imagine trying to get the facts from the flood is very difficult. So let's start off with a timeline approach. Let's talk about what happened in the very beginning of last year. In January of 2025, it's been a remarkable year, as you can imagine. We saw some polling around this Project 2025 initiative to essentially dismantle the department. I want you to take a look at how people at this point were thinking about the department, and I want you to notice that across multiple spaces, the preponderance of folks felt that it was a very bad idea to dismantle the department. Didn't matter if you were of a particular lens politically, it didn't matter your gender, it didn't matter your age. Abolishing the department sounded like a bad idea. We move forward to February of 2025, and Secretary McMahon comes for her confirmation hearing, and she said exactly what you said in the Mythbusters.
President Trump is reportedly drafting an executive order requiring the Secretary of Education to develop a plan for downsizing the Department of Education and working with Congress to eliminate entirely. Yes or no, do you agree that since the department was created by Congress, it would need an act of Congress to actually close the Department of Education?
And certainly President Trump understands that we'll be working with Congress. We'd like to do this right. We'd like to make sure that we are presenting a plan that I think our senators could get on board with and our Congress could get on board with, that would have a better functioning Department of Education, but certainly does require congressional action.
So, as you can hear from the Secretary during her own confirmation hearing, she not only agrees with the fundamental fact that the department cannot be dismantled by an executive order, but also initiates this idea that the department will bring a plan forth to Congress to ask for its dismantling, and yet no plan currently exists, and nothing has been told to Congress without their approval around the dismantling that we've already seen. Take a look later at another hearing where the Secretary has to discuss this. around the dismantling specifically.
Do you agree? And let me just once again get your feelings on this. That if there is a movement to abolish the Department of Education, it has to go through the United States Congress.
Yes, it is set up by the United States Congress, and we work with Congress. It clearly cannot be shut down without it.
And yet, just after that confirmation hearing, what we see is the department starting to whittle down its responsibility to the public. First, it begins with whittling down the amount of money being disseminated to already appropriated research grants. When I say already appropriated, what I mean is Congress has already decided on a budget for fiscal year 25. They have already decided on how much money they will disseminate for specific grant areas and approved it. And yet, the department disobeyed that appropriations process and decided to remove specific grants and contracts from that funding cycle. And we saw millions and millions and millions of dollars lost in the research space across America. That research space included longitudinal studies like the National Longitudinal Transition Study. It's one of the largest data sets this country has around kids with disabilities and their ability to transition from secondary to post-secondary outcomes. We follow these kids for over 10 years, collecting data so that we can better understand the types of policies, the school practices, and the implementation and the fidelity of that implementation toward those practices in support of special education. And that was summarily canceled. It was a $30+ million project that was supposed to actually be published within months. NCLD and other groups did bring this up at Ed. I brought it up in my conversation with the secretary herself in May. I had a one-on-one conversation with her, and that NLTS study was reinstated in September. That being said, we cannot advocate for every single grant or project. It would be like litigating what we're seeing now nationally, all of the work that's been canceled. And we know how long that takes and how much person power that takes. So, what we're seeing is an erosion of the data that would help us make informed decisions about the work and the education of all kids, but exclusively and specifically about kids with disabilities in these cuts. We then see in March, as you might recall, huge reductions in force. They were immediately litigated, and those litigations took several weeks. We saw people brought back under that RIF, but many people actually took the opportunity to do early retirement. And so at this point, Ed is at an infrastructure well below its original staffing levels. And what you'll notice is the comment in the chat earlier about OCR being gutted. You'll see at the top, OCR was one of the largest hit offices with those reductions in force early in 2025. I'll also mention, just so you are completely aware, right? OCR continues to exist. People came back in January. I spoke with the Assistant Secretary for OCR. She confirmed that there's no single priority, but rather she has told people in OCR, investigate everything. That being said, between March and November of 2025, when we saw the original reductions in force, we saw the litigation, we saw people, some come back toward the fall, and then we saw the October shutdown. The GAO, the General Accounting Office of the United States federal government, did, at the request of Senator Sanders, review the cases that were taken in and completed by OCR. 90% of cases between March and November were dismissed, not investigated, dismissed. This sent a signal, we believe, to families across the country that OCR is no longer an option for a robust complaint and resolution process. We believe that families need to continue to submit complaints, but I can imagine that many families were feeling completely demoralized because of this impact. Let's fast forward, to March. This is the first executive order issued to dismantle the department, and it also included work on DEI. I then immediately reached out to the secretary's office. We had a one-on-one meeting with her, as well as with the acting assistant secretary for OCR and the acting assistant secretary for OSERS, which is Office of Special Ed Programs and Rehabilitative Services. And they were very explicitly communicating that they believe in supporting students with disabilities and that they would never remove funding or harm IDEA. They did not, however, confirm at this point that they would not move OSERS out of the department. They would not confirm that they would not block grant the funds for IDEA, nor did they confirm that they were trying to remove certain protections and put them back into the state's hands. So at this point, things are very tumultuous, somewhat chaotic, and we're essentially waiting to see what happens next with the department once the rifts were litigated and people had to come back into the offices. In July, you might recall that we heard nationally there were close to $7 billion worth of funds that, again, were withheld. And by that, I mean they were not sent to states on time. They were sent to states so late that states were telling us they were having to fire, lay off, and reduce in force staffing within schools and district offices because they were not sure the funds would ever arrive. States were also not sure funds would arrive for block granting purposes with the Title I, which is a necessity for schools across the country, after school tutoring, after school programs, and summer enrichment programs. So at this point, the Senate held a hearing, an open hearing around what was going on with the department. And I joined several of my colleagues in testifying around what the impact would be and was on students with disabilities. We also highlighted the deep concerns we had around the Office of Civil Rights and the fact that we were not seeing complaints investigated properly and that families were left without recourse. Just after that testimony, right the day before, and then about 3 days after, we saw the $7 billion released. We cannot correlate the fact that we had this amazing response from advocacy groups and advocates across the country and that decision to release the funds. I can tell you, though, that when we heard from folks at the department about those funds, we heard that they had been receiving complaint, questions, letters, hand over fist by our congressmen and our senators. And that is because people like you in communities were reaching out and asking, what is going on? When are we going to see this money? And why is it being withheld? Voters essentially were the lever to get those in Congress and the Senate to reach out to the department and remind them of their duty and their responsibility to public schools. So while I can't guarantee there is causation there, I absolutely believe that it was the advocacy of people like you that made sure those funds were released. Then, about a week later, we saw the first interagency agreement come through the department, moving OCTAE over to the Department of Labor. OCTAE is for Career and Technical Education. It felt like, in my opinion, the simplest and the least provocative first portion of the department to move. It was clear that there was a pavement in the media that Anything having to do with career and technical education belonged in labor because labor does oversee much of the rehabilitative services work that people post-secondary schools receive and are recipients of. They also work very closely with RSA, rehabilitative services in the department. And of course, things like apprenticeships are actually embedded at labor. This, however, was the red herring. We all started to realize, hold on a second. It might be the simplest and least provocative, but it is also the pathway for future IAAs. If no one says anything about this, there will be more to come. There was not a huge advocacy convening around Octane moving. I I couldn't tell you exactly why that is, whether it was people were in decision fatigue, they were feeling the whiplash of so much happening, the fact that the convening power around career technical education is not as large as special educators. Any number of factors are included in why we didn't see a lot of fanfare here, but it allowed this essential roadmap to begin. And now we've seen 6 IAAs afterward. In September, after this move to the department, we saw cuts at the Office of Special Education Programs. Earlier, I mentioned to you that it's a myth. OSEP still remains, right? It's a myth that there are no resources. They still remain. All of that being said, the fact that our IEPs and 504s remain legally required says a lot for somebody who is knowledgeable about how to ensure there's accountability. But when there is very little accountability and very little monitoring happening around whether those funds are used appropriately, whether IEPs are implemented accurately and robustly, right now what we're worried about is the legality of things is what is on paper, but not necessarily in practice. And these funds removed from OSEP were the first start of our larger concern that while we may have a law, the practical application of that law is in jeopardy. The fact that we were able to cut such intentional funding for deaf-blind centers and have people left without interventions and services meant that everybody was on the table, right? Everybody should be concerned. This was not a parental issue. This needs to be an issue of every 18-year-old voter. It needs to be an issue of every 80-year-old voter, whether you have a student in the school district or not. What's happening at the Department of Education impacts the economic mobility of the entire nation. So we, as an education and special education community, began mobilizing. I'm really, really glad that we did this because not only do we host media spotlights, town halls, we got the word out almost like within weeks after we saw the government completely shut down. And the rifts at Ed were traumatic. I say that because originally the comments from Ed were that the rifts were due to the government shutdown. For those of you who were not in the weeds like I was, we learned through litigation that in discovery, those rifts were pre-planned. They had nothing to do with the shutdown, but fortuitously happened with good timing. And we saw all of Ed essentially sitting at home and some actually having been called back for what we consider required service, but not being paid. Just to give you a scope of the cost to the government during not just this shutdown, but the previous RIF also at OCR, I'll look at the GAO report later for exact dollars, but it's my recollection that we spent $22 million on salaries between March and November on government employees in Ed that were on RIF, that were in the reduction in force, essentially laid off. doing absolutely no work whatsoever. Of course, the government was reopened, as we all know, in late November, but some of these employees didn't come back until January. We're talking about 9 to 10 months of absolutely no work in certain capacities and functions of ed that are legislated in statute as regulatory requirements. We had a lot to say about what was happening at Ed at this point. We were deeply concerned about a number of things, to include the fact that special education felt in peril as a system. That is because a USA Today op-ed was published by the secretary indicating that, look, even during the rifts, nothing happened to schools and classrooms. This is the perfect example of why the department needs not exist. A colleague of mine and I got together with a group of advocates from other organizations. CEC was involved, NDRN, the National Disability Rights Movement, the Center for Learner Equity, the ARC of the United States, Autism Society. These groups, large, very powerful with our memberships, and also our moral aptitude around what is right for kids, we decided that we would rebut that article. Excuse me, we also included COPA. I can't believe I was remiss to include COPA, which is the Parent Advocates and Attorneys. So Chad and I led an op-ed in the USA Today rebutting Secretary McMahon's fallacies, and it was published within days, and it essentially gave argument to each one of the points she made around the necessity and the conditions of the department. I was really proud not only to have it published for the public, not just the special ed community, of which is mighty, but not large enough to move this movement. But I was also very, very happy that it got picked up by lots of different outlets as a clear indication of people starting to question the ethics around the dismantling of the department. In November, those risks were reversed. We saw the government come back, but we weren't sure if it would actually remain because January 31st was the looming deadline for a continuing resolution. We knew we had to actually approve a different budget after the fact, or an extension, or we were going to go to a government shutdown all over again. And I was on the Hill meeting with legislators the day that the 6 other interagency agreements were announced. As you all probably know, IAAs are essentially a memorandum of understanding. It is an agreement between one agency and another around what a separate agency will fulfill with the requirements of the original agency's duties. We thought at some point that OSERs, our special ed folks, would actually be in these IAAs. We came to learn that they would not be announced that day, but that it would likely be imminent. Those IAAs, however, did include large swaths of the department, including the Office of Elementary and Secondary Education, OESE. OESE went over to labor, and it caused a lot of discussion and some consternation, truly, around whether OSERs should also go to labor if it were moved. Would it be better to have OSERs and OESE together so that we saw the inclusion practices, the collaborative nature of both of the agencies working side by side, hall by hall? Or would we see OSERs move to the Health and Human Services, HHS, department instead, essentially creating another set of exclusionary practices for our kids? How can we expect our colleagues to collaborate with us when we can't even use the same systems of information between the different departments? So those IAs, once again, did not meet with a lot of fanfare. We did not see a ton of people up in arms communicating about the problematic nature of the IAs, the fact that this was an illegal measure, etc. And I, again, can only assume that the special ed community is indeed very special. Our superpower in many ways is our convening power. It's our ability to advocate on behalf of our kids. And I really believe that we have not left the department because they are attempting to find the most substantial pathway to move it with the greatest plan, even though we've not been shown what that plan might be. So these are where those agencies or those offices, excuse me, ended up landing. Some of these felt less difficult to suppress than others, and some just felt entirely confusing. What you're not seeing here are some of the offices that were actually abandoned. So the Office of Technical Education and Ed Tech specifically has actually been completely removed from the department. Nobody works there. It does not exist any longer, and it has not existed for more than 6 months. So as we think about educational technology and assistive technology for our kids, you have to understand that there is nobody in the department supporting those initiatives or advocating on behalf of them. In January, we did see the offices start to reopen. We did see the continuing resolution in Congress passed, and so we didn't see the government shut down. Homeland Security did not see the budget passed, so we did see some remnants of folks being riffed there, but in ed, everything went forward. However, we did see two additional interagency agreements. Again, not us, but I can tell you I've now met with a secretary again in December. She said to me and my colleagues that OSERS will move, that it will move with a plan in place, and that they have a fundamental commitment to serving kids with disabilities. I am not here to tell you whether or not that commitment is accurate. I'm here to convey what was conveyed to me. So, I would like to draw your attention to the fact that we did ask as recently as 2 weeks ago to the Assistant Secretary of OCR, as well as the Acting Assistant Secretary of OSERS, with whom we have a very collegial relationship, what the timeline was, as well as what the plan was. And my understanding is there is no current timeline that can be shared, that the department is seeking feedback and having listening sessions with constituents like you and me and others. And they are simply asking what preference we might have around where OSERS lands, whether it goes to the Health and Human Services Department or whether it goes to labor. NCLD will not accept the premise of the question. We have said hand over fist many times. We do not think it needs to move from the department, nor do we think that that move would benefit students. We have asked also for the department to share with us not only the plan, but demonstrate how a move to another department would benefit students. And we're awaiting a response at this point. One thing that was top of mind for many advocates in 2026 was where we stood with the funding levels for special education supports. As many of you know, maybe even I'll say all of you, because it's such a important tagline when we talk to legislators, both at the local, district, state, and the federal level. IDEA was passed with the expectation and commitment that Congress would pay for 40% of the cost of educating a child who receives special education services, period. We have never in the history of that law come even close to half that amount. We have neared 18% almost 10 years ago, but we're currently under 12%, which means states and local districts have to supplement the cost of the education of our kids who receive services. And that supplement is typically in state and local taxes, of which we know are hardly equitable across communities in this country. So all eyes have been on this budget to determine what Congress would approve in this next year's funding. What we really saw was essentially level funding for all of the programs. Sometimes we celebrate that because we know what could have happened. We could have seen dramatic dips. The president's budget last year that he sent essentially as a signal, right? This is what I would like you to think about when you want to know about my priorities. I'm putting them on paper in numerics. The president's signal in his budget was zeroing out programs like the National Center for Special Education Research. So it could have been much worse. That being said, level funding, for many of you already know this, is essentially lowered funding because of inflation. We really didn't see anything take account for the cost of materials year over year. We saw very modest, and when I say modest, that is even overstating, increases in a specific portion of the budget, about $20 million more in a specific portion around grants, but in a $1 billion budget, it's pennies, right? I will also draw your attention to the fact that um, when you think about how the budget is created in the United States, we have discretionary funding, we have non-discretionary funding. Non-discretionary funding includes things like defense. You don't get to decide to take it away. It's always there. Discretionary funding, what you can increase and decrease or remove entirely, includes education. Education as a whole of the budget is typically less than 2% of our federal dollars. So, when you think about the amount we receive in special education from the federal government into our local schools and classrooms, it's a very small proportion for those of you who are school leaders and administrators. I am with you when you cobble together the fabric of your funding. And then I'll bring you to, we have about 15 minutes left, so I'll bring you to my final slide, which is the current circumstances that we are navigating. I think you all probably saw, heard, or witnessed the president's comments on Monday, and those comments were not in isolation. They have been peppered throughout his commentary in the last several months, specifically geared toward a political candidate, but using the office of the presidency to belittle, discriminate, and use pejorative language towards an entire populace of people. And in doing so, calling into question the ability of somebody who is neurodivergent or has a learning disability to lead the country. We were ashamed that we had to call out the fact that a learning disability should not preclude somebody from the highest offices in the land. But we had to, and we had to clarify the inaccuracies. And CLD did write a statement addressing the president's comments. And we're really happy to see so many people share it, but also use it to voice their own position as a person who is neurodivergent or with a learning disability, and why they should not be limited in their achievement by bias or stigma. And that felt more powerful than any statement we could have provided. It's the fact that people are not only willing, but they feel compelled to come out and say, I have a learning disability and I have all of the characteristics necessary to lead. So I want to appreciate you in the audience who have kids, who are teaching your children about advocacy, self-advocacy, and self-determination. And you're teaching your children that no person anywhere should ever be in a position to decide somebody else's outcomes. And I'm grateful that kids across the country, parents, teenagers, and people late diagnosed were able to come out and say, I can achieve whatever I put my mind to because I have equal access, unlimited opportunity to my own life's outcomes. So with that, I'm gonna stop sharing. Actually, I'll just put this up in case folks want to take a look at the resources that we have. You can take a quick picture with your phone or use the QR code. We have an act now on the website, so I'll give that to you all. But then I'm gonna take the stop share and very excited about the questions. So, Charlene, do we have questions so far?
We do
Great.
indeed, Dr. Rodriguez. And I just want to say thank you for that incredibly sobering and yet pieces of hopefulness discussion. We feel, again, we can tell this audience, as you said, is very well educated, but we have questions. So let's have at it. Um, we hear so many headlines talking about parents being their child's best advocates. That is easier said than done. What advice do you have for parents of neurodivergent kids who want to better understand education policy and disability rights?
Well, what I would like to offer are several organizations that have toolkits, resource guides, and just the ability to honestly network with other parents like us, my own child, my stepkids, all neurodivergent. And sometimes it can feel very isolating and almost feels oppressive when you walk into the IEP meeting. I lead an organization on this, and I sat in a room of 12 people, right, who told me what they thought about my child. And I used to assess for the school. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, I have done this a million times. What must a parent who's doing this for the first time truly feel?
Yeah.
NCLD has a family leadership council. We would be so happy to have you come join. The Council for Exceptional Children similarly has a parent and family network, and they are very practitioner friendly with the convening that they have annually, like a conference. The Learning Disability Association of America, another LD organization, has a parent and family network. They also have a convening annually. Both CEC and LDA just took place. One you could come to if you're interested in learning more about the research in special ed and specifically LD. The Council for Learning Disabilities will host its convening in October. And it's very nominal to come in the cost, but it's a really great opportunity to actually hear from the researchers about what they're seeing, hearing, feeling, and how they're supporting and intervening in schools. And there are a host of other spaces. I can actually maybe drop some additional info to you, Charlene. You can send it out.
Okay, and you have a parent tab on the NCLD website, right?
Yep. And we have applications that are ongoing. So, and if you just want to hear, I'm very accessible. Just email me and we'll figure it out.
You sound kind of busy.
No.
Just saying. Okay, here we go. This question is from a former school board member who knows her way around policy. The question is, how do we support and monitor districts and supports around youth with disabilities?
So, my first thought here is most school districts are still decoupling the general education from the special education when it comes to administration. So
Mhm.
even though we say we're inclusive and we say we are either co-teaching or working collectively in schools, when you think about the administration of special ed, it's still a very compliance-oriented environment. And so finding the person in the district who is charged with the special education programming, whether it's the department or the commissioner, et cetera, that person's going to be the single source of truth with regard to how special ed is actually being navigated, the resources available, the teachers that they are hiring and have staffed in schools, what they need in school systems, etc. If you're thinking about a higher level than your school district, my suggestion is to go to the special education, essentially chief of the state. We have a chief of special ed. We call them chiefs for the general education population, like the state chiefs. We have special ed directors for every state across the country. I will, however, tell you 17 of the 50 states have brand new special ed directors, brand new to the job. That turnover rate is very high. It's extraordinarily difficult, especially when you don't have a federal government helping you interpret and apply the law accurately. It can be a deeply exhausting and isolating place. So truly befriending those people is your best bet in getting the insider information and also calling out what gaps exist between the general ed and the special ed environments, whether it's funding, staffing, supports, etc.
Okay, let's take a higher level look for a minute here. Jackie, the word disability we know can mean really different things depending upon context. From a legal and policy perspective, what does the term disability actually mean in education law?
I so appreciate whoever wrote this. I was on a call for about an hour and a half earlier today, truly philosophically deconstructing disability and how we have a socialized construct around that term. The term exists because we have legal protections to support a student's outcomes, a person's outcomes. It is a protected class to be disabled. When you think about disability in the context of all disabilities, not just neurodivergent minds and or LD minds, what we know through history is without the legal protection, we are essentially excluding people from having social, economic mobility and the ability to lead independent lives. So the disability community of advocates, we hold on strongly to the word because we know what the word gives people. The word itself, though, is the social construct that we have decided it means, not abled, right? How great would it be if we lived in a world where we didn't have to mandate federal funding, legal protections, supports, but yet recognize that learner variability is part of the human the human genome, right? It is a part of who we are. And we don't have to call out a difference for somebody in order to get them supports. We
Yeah.
are not there yet. If we said that people just thought and learned differently to those in Congress and or in a series of IEP or 504 meetings, you would not be protected and have entitlements like you do with the word disability. That's why we keep it.
Okay. Not surprisingly, that good question came from our friend Riley Mulcahy.
Thank you, Riley.
All right. Really good questions, everybody. They're complicated. We've got just a few minutes, Jackie. Let's see how we can do. What's the deal with public charter schools and special ed? Why are they so resistant to IEPs and 504s? Does it all come down to budget and money in charter special ed?
I am not an expert in charter schools. I will give you my basic understanding, but I will also send you all contact information for a very good friend and colleague who is now the interim executive director at the Center for Learner Equity. CLE used to be the Association for Special Education in Charter Schools. Their entire mission and purpose was and continues to be supporting charter schools in their infrastructure around special education services. Why is there resistance? I think you just called it out. When you are trying to, split a rock in half, it's impossible. If you have only so much funding, only so much ability to staff, and yet required to support a group of students who need more than that, it is an impossible task. I don't think it's just charter schools. I think the reason we see a rise in the private school movement is because we have a populace of people who prefer not to think about learner variability and to only subscribe to this essentially normed view of how people should be and think. And we're going to see a lot of resistance with federal school vouchers related to special education and kids receiving services in private schools that are not required to provide it.
Okay, fair enough. So back to your talk a minute, Jackie. Here's a question. What is the purpose of all these IAAs? To empty out the Department of Congress or so the Congress can feel justified in closing the department?
No, I think in truth, my professional supposition is it's circumventing Congress. And to be perfectly honest, Congress knows that. IAAs are a means to an end. They have been pitched by the secretary as a quote proof of concept. in an effort to demonstrate that the department need not exist. But I think Congress has recently, through the appropriations and the budget conversation in January, told the department they don't have a legal mandate to dismantle. They are concerned about the optics of dismantling, and they believe the IAAs to be problematic, and they have asked the department to come in and actually give bi-weekly updates on those IAAs. I think that right now there's going to be some butting of the heads between continued IAAs and this idea of dismantling entirely. I don't foresee them being able to just shut the lights off, but I do see them moving OSERs soon.
Okay. I have one quick question, then I want to give you 1 minute just to sort of wrap up. So the asker here is asking about decoupling dyslexia from the SLD eligibility. Are they trying to remove it entirely? Is this state-based or what?
The federal legislation, I'll name it because I want you to know what you need to advocate against. It is called the 21st Century Dyslexia Act. It is not the first time it's been introduced. It is a Senator Cassidy bill. Senator Cassidy has his wife and he, both doctors, have a charter school in Louisiana where they support kids with learning disabilities, and specifically language-based learning disabilities in reading. They believe that dyslexia should be removed from SLD and should be its own category, germane to any other large group of students with that identification. The concern we have, multifaceted. The definition of dyslexia in the bill is wholly wanting. The ability for somebody to be identified with dyslexia within the bill is deeply problematic. The idea that dyslexia does not also have some correlation to dysgraphia and dyscalculia is incorrect. The research does indicate it's not a causation yet, but there is corollary research that indicates that those three areas of an SLD often see itself in one child. So to remove that is antithetical to an SLD. And then you have the very tactical problems of funding and the stigma and the idea of chaos in schools because we still do not identify a kid with dyslexia. We identify a kid with a specific learning disability, and then often we see a dyslexia diagnosis after the fact once we know more about the child. Lots to say on that assessment piece, but the bill is really problematic. So we are going to consistently oppose it.
All right. Well, Dr. Rodriguez, this has been an amazing hour. We have
Good.
come to the end of our hour, but I just wanted to say briefly, Ebony Tyson has been trying to write in saying she started a nonprofit focused on advocacy, wants to know how to reach these organizations. Someone else wrote in and said, how can I help? So we can follow up with these questions, but I guess, we're all here to say, how can we help? So maybe you could finish by just telling us from your
Yeah.
perspective, what can people do?
I don't want you to feel that you have to be abreast of every issue and every change that happens. I want you to feel confident that advocacy organizations like ours are listening to your needs and your wants, and we are doing that hard work. So that's number one, right? Like you have enough going on. I'm a parent, I understand. Number two, though, is we absolutely need your voice. If you are willing to spend 30 seconds on a website like ours, entering your name and zip code, you can send a pre-planned letter to your legislator, and they do make a difference. All of our advocacy organizations have these action networks that you can engage in. It really does take very little time, but the other part that takes little time is you doing it, pressing the arrow button, and sending it to somebody. Anybody in your contact list, whether it's through Instagram or Twitter or X, you can also ask somebody else to advocate on your child's behalf and call them to action. And finally, I want you to not shy away from the hard conversations that are happening because I sincerely believe your child's soccer coach, their hockey coach, their orchestra director, they are not aware of what's happening to the kids receiving services. If they were aware, they would be repulsed. So when the conversation comes up around the IEP meeting, don't feel afraid to say that your child has an IEP or that you're nervous about what's going on, or wow, I'm concerned that the funding will evaporate, because that will instigate a conversation with somebody who likely will become an ally and then an advocate. And you are your kid's, number one advocate. So if you can draw in some colleagues to help you, I think you should try.
Well, thank you for that, Dr. Jackie Rodriguez. What a treat to have you here today. Thank you for, I know this is from everybody, for all the work your organization is doing. Thank you, parents and educators, for being on with us tonight and all the great questions and all the great comments. So take care, everybody. This video will be available soon. And as Jackie said, we can all help. We can all help. So thank you, everybody. Bye for now. Thank you, Jackie.
Thanks, everybody.